guys, it's Nicole here from the Little Craft House. Today's project is a little bit different. Today I thought we could make some silicone molds. So just like this, out of liquid silicone. These ones will mainly be used for resin. However, I'm going to make a couple that I can use for polymer clay as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is gather up what we like to refer to as blanks. So the blanks are the items that I want to be able to reproduce. So this is what I'm going to make my molds with. I've got a few different types of jewellery pieces here, and the moulds that I'm making today are for jewellery. However, if you wanted to mould something bigger or something different, the same principles pretty much apply. So you can still keep watching because hopefully you'll still pick up some tips and tricks on how to do moulds of other things as well. So the black pieces that I've got here are acrylic laser cut pieces, and they're from our blank sets that we sell in our shop. The other things that I've got here are some Christmas trees, which are also laser cut, but they are ready-made pieces ready to go for jewellery. So they already contain holes, whereas the black ones don't. The most important thing to remember when using the laser cut pieces is to peel the protective cover off of them. We don't want to leave that on, so I'm just peeling them off here. Sometimes they're a little tricky to see as it is a clear film, so yeah, it can be a little bit tricky. So in my pile of blanks here, I also have some green snakes, which are I think they're acrylic. They're a bit more plasticky than these laser cut acrylic pieces. But yes, I've got the snakes, and I've also got some Christmas trees that are made out of polymer clay. So I'm not quite sure how the polymer clay ones are going to go because I don't think they're quite flat enough, but we're going to give it a go anyway and just see how it works. When it comes to choosing which items to cast, you can pretty much cast anything. As long as it's smooth, so shiny or smooth matte finish, both work really well. And if it's got a flat bottom on it, I find it works even better because that gives you a nice base to work with. Okay, so next up is our mould surround. So I've got a few things here that you can use for it. So we've got an acrylic surround, which we sell in our store. We've got the egg ring there, which you can just find at the supermarket, and we have Lego. So when you're choosing what surround to use, you just need to think about what items you're casting. So egg rings work really well if you've only got a couple of things and if they are small. So they're perfect if you're just going to do studs or just one pair of dangles. The surrounds, we do have a few different sizes. I've only got the one size here at the moment, so I'll put my bigger things in that. And Lego works really well if you want to customize the size of what you're doing. So when I've cast bowls and dishes before, I've used Lego because I can build it as high as I need and as wide. So I don't have to find a container or something else to surround that's approximately the same size. The most important thing when you're choosing your surround is that you don't want to have too much gaps in it, because the more gaps and free empty space you have, the more liquid silicone that you have to use. So therefore it becomes quite an expensive project if you're using loads of liquid silicone for only a couple of pieces. So I usually take a little while to work out which pieces are going to fit best and what I can get the most out of. So I think I've pretty much decided here what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the Lego for the snakes. As I say, I don't want them too close together either, because when we pour the silicone, we need it to be able to go down the gaps and not create air bubbles. So the closer items are together, the more likely you are to get a little gap, a little air bubble. And when we're talking moulds, air bubbles are not your friend. You do not want air bubbles, whatever you do. So next we need to work on the base. So what will be the base now will be the top once our mould is complete. So we're going to use some book covering contact. Anything that is sticky will work. So I know some people have used masking tape or other sort of transfer tape style paper, but I've always used book contact and this works really well for me, so that is what I'm going to use again today. And so I'm going to cut the pieces to the size of my surrounds, just with a little gap around or a little bit extra overhang around each of the edges. Now, I've also never really had any issues with leakages. Sometimes with Lego, if the mould is quite big, I've had a little bit of leakage. I think just because then there's quite a lot of pressure, and with the little tiny gaps there are, then yeah, sometimes it's leaked out. If you want to secure it more firmly, you could always run a strip of hot glue around the external edge. Right, so once they're all cut, I'm just going to peel the backing sheets off and pop my moulds on top. And it's just important to give them a nice firm push down, because that is going to create that bond. I'm going to put the polymer clay pieces into this one. I'm still a little unsure how it's going to turn out. I didn't purposely make these polymer clay pieces as blanks. They were just some pieces that I made the other day, and I saw them laying there and I thought I'll cast them. So yeah, it'll be good to see how they turn out. So the liquid silicone that we're using today is called Pinky Sil. It's a product by Barnes, and it's got a few positives and negatives. I'm going to go into that in a second. I'm going to mix it into my little beaker cup here. This is a 100ml cup, so I'm probably going to mix about 100 mils, I think. I've also got some tools here as well. Firstly, my stirring stick. This is an acrylic stirring stick. A couple of those. I've also got a little pointy tool here. I may need that to help me pop some bubbles. Also got a little toothpick as well, because yeah, as I said before, bubbles aren't our friends, so we need to try and get rid of them. Okay, so whilst I pour this out and mix it up, I thought I would talk a little bit about those ups and downs that I just mentioned a second ago. So firstly, one of the best things about this is that it's a very easy 1-to-1 ratio to mix. So yeah, I'm just going to do 50 mils of the part A, 50 mils of part B. Now, another positive is that when it's all mixed up properly, being a pink and a white, the colouring of it goes a consistent colour, so you can tell when it's mixed up. One of the main downsides of Pinky Sil is that it only has a 6-minute work time, so you have to work super fast. So that is why I like to get all that prep work of prepping my moulds done beforehand. So once I start mixing this, then I can get on with it straight away and pour it. Now, even though that is a downside, it is also a positive, because even though it is a very quick work time, it is also a very quick set time. So the bottle says 20 minutes for demold. I always like to leave a little bit longer, but yeah, 6 minutes of work time and 20 minutes until demold. So you can actually make your molds and use them on the same day. You don't even have to leave them overnight to set, which is what I like a lot about this, because I generally want something and I want to use it right now. I don't want to have to wait. And so one of my biggest tips for working with Pinky Sil is to not only have your moulds ready, but have a spare mould ready as well, ready to go, so that if you have extra liquid silicone left, you're able to pour that into another one to start another mould. So you don't have to do a singular pour with this, you can layer it. So that's why 100 mils would probably be the maximum that I would mix at a time. And if I had a particularly deep mould, then I would do 2 or 3 pours of that, just to make sure that it wasn't going to set on me whilst I was working. You also want to make sure that you've got enough time to try and work out any bubbles that have formed. I keep talking about bubbles, but it is such an important thing to make sure that you don't have any bubbles left over. You don't want to have little craters within your mould, because it's just going to mean more sanding and more work for you later. Okay, so now it's time to pour. So I want to kind of do this slowly, but not too slowly, and I want to try and keep tapping as well, because tapping is going to help to bring any of those dreaded bubbles to the surface. I also want to make sure that the Pinky Sil goes into all those gaps around all the edges of the pieces. Now, sometimes I'll work on something like a tray or something so when I tap it creates more vibration. I didn't do that today, so I'm just tapping the side of the mould, just hoping that that's going to be enough to shift the bubbles. Pinky Sil's pretty good and it doesn't generally create a lot of bubbles, but you do get some get trapped in there, as with all liquid silicones anyway. So I'm just pouring the last bit onto the second mould now, tapping the first mould as I go. It'd be really handy to have a couple of sets of hands right now, but that's okay. And I'm just going to scrape out everything that's left in the cup. And I'll talk about cleanup again in a second because, yeah, cleanup's actually really fun, but we'll talk about that in a second. So I don't know if you can see here, but some bubbles have come to the top. So I'm just going to poke them with the toothpick and just try and get them to go away. We also don't really want the bubbles to stay on here. We don't want them just to try and pop themselves because if they set, it's going to make an uneven surface, and that is now going to be, or once it's cured, it's going to be the bottom of the mould. So we need it to be as flat as we can. So we do want to pop the bubbles and not just leave them sitting on top. You can see here as I'm trying to pop these bubbles that my silicone is starting to thicken up. It's leaving little marks in the tops as I'm moving it there. So I'll just try and shake it down to level it back out again. But yeah, so it's already starting to firm up. So I'm just going to pop these to the side now and then we'll work on our next moulds. So I realised I probably need to do up an extra mould as well. So I'm just going to use these little pieces here. And I just wanted to show you how much detail the Pinky Sil will cast in making the mould. So these little, I suppose they're resin or plastic flowers. I'm going to use these because I really like to use these with my polymer clay, to make little polymer clay moulds with these. So yeah, the Pinky Sil picks up a lot of detail. So once I've cast them, I'll be able to show you how much detail it actually does pick up. And so once again, I think I'm going to mix another 100 mils of liquid silicone. So again, 50 mils of part A and then 50 mils of part B. So another tip that I have for getting out the bubbles is also, I forgot about it before, but a little air blower. So I have this little air blower for my alcohol inks, and that actually helps to get the bubbles out really well as well. I just give it a little light blow across the top and it just seems to help push the silicone and pop the bubbles. Okay, so once I'm happy that I've got out as many bubbles as I can, I'm just going to pop these to the side and leave them to cure. Okay, so I've been off and had some lunch, so it's probably been more like 30 to 40 minutes now. Each of the moulds feel quite firm to touch, which means that they are ready to demold. And so just a gentle squeeze around the edge of the surrounds here, and they should just easily pop out, like so. And I'm not sure if you can quite see, but there's only a tiny bit of leakage under each one of these, which would be because the bottoms weren't completely flat. But can you see the detail that it has taken from each of these little flowers? So every little petal crease that the flower has been moulded with the liquid silicone. So that's what we want. We want that detail so we can reproduce these. Obviously, the downside to that is that if you cast anything that is or has a slight imperfection, that is going to cast as well. So any imperfection on your original paste will go into your mould, and therefore everything that you cast after that is going to have the imperfection as well. So try and choose things that are perfectly smooth, that don't have any little dents or imperfections in them. So you can see there with the snakes, there was a slight little bit of leakage underneath of them. Sometimes you can rub off that little bit of leakage, but otherwise there's a few other ways we can do it, and I'll talk about that in a second. Just with the Lego though, you can see the edge difference. So Lego does have a bit more of a rough finish around the edge than what one of the smoother moulds like the egg rings or the acrylic frame has, just because it goes into those cracks. Now, these are proving a little bit tricky to get out just because of the detail in them. But I'm really excited about being able to cast more of these. My snake earrings are always really good sellers, so to be able to produce more of them will be awesome. Okay, so to neaten these up, those bits, so there's a little bit of overhang of the silicone there. So I just want to neaten that up as well as around the edges. And what I've got here is just a little cuticle cutter like you use for your fingernails. This one's a little blunt because I've used it quite a few times on my moulds. But yeah, just running that simply around the edge, it just slices neatly off any of that overhang. And then when it comes to the pieces, I'll zoom in so you can see a little bit easier there. So when it comes to neatening up the pieces, I use either that or I do have a little pair of scissors that are very sharp on the ends so that I can try and just snip away any of the extra overhang as well. And so it might sound a little bit silly, but wastage wise, all these little bits that you're trimming off or that I trim off, I pop in a little cup and just put it to the side. When I do my larger moulds for things like dishes and bowls, and they need a lot of liquid silicone to fill them, I use these scrappy bits as filler, because that way it's obviously meaning less liquid silicone that I need to use. So I've given them all a little bit of a clean up now. They're all mostly all looking pretty good. I just wanted to show a quick little demonstration here with the flower mould. I've got a bit of scrap clay here, so nothing fancy, but I just thought I would pop that in and just show you those details that it's taken. Usually I would slice the clay off the top to make it a nice flat bottom, but it's just an example, so I'll just shove it in like this. Focuses, can you see that? So it's pretty much exactly the same as the original flower that was cast. So obviously if I wanted to make a yellow center, I would have used a little bit of yellow clay first, but yeah, see all those little details. So I mentioned before about cleanup. Honestly, it is one of the best bits and the most easiest cleanups you'll have, because the silicone has set in the plastic cup, and on my sticks here, I just rub it off, pull it out the cup, and it's good to go for next time. Nothing fancy needed to clean it up, just, yeah, pull it out. And again, I will just pop this to the side so that I can use it in one of my bigger projects next time. And because all of our other tools and utensils that we used are also shiny and smooth, we can just clean them up the same way. So the Lego, if there's anything left over on them, just pull off the extra bit of liquid silicone and they're good as new. You can use them again next time. And that also goes for the pieces that we cast as well. So I can go ahead and make earrings out of these snakes or Christmas trees because I just have to clean it off, and yeah, they're just exactly the same as they were before we made the molds with them. So I've just realised I forgot to show you guys the Christmas trees that I made with the polymer clay pieces. They didn't turn out overly well. I probably should have been a little bit more intentional with the clay pieces and given them a nice good sanding first to smooth them off. There was quite a bit of leakage, so the edges ended up being quite rough. With the pieces that had the holes in them too, like these Christmas trees, the liquid silicone obviously didn't go all the way down, so rather than having the little nub there to make the hole, it hasn't quite worked properly. But that's okay because it gives me a guide for where I need to drill my hole in my pieces anyway. The same happened with the snakes as well. Usually with my resin pieces, I would just drill them, so it's actually not too much of an issue for me anyway. So that brings me to the end of our little tutorial today. So hopefully you've picked up some tips and tricks on how to make your own molds. And if you do give it a go, please tag me because I would love to see what you've made. Over the next few weeks, I'll be making some projects using these molds, so stay tuned here on YouTube as well as over on my Instagram channel. Thanks again for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.